September 1885. The question that would haunt Elena Hartford for years to come wasn't whether she'd made a mistake. It was whether some mistakes were meant to happen. The train's whistle shrieked one final time as it pulled away from the weathered platform, leaving behind only dust and regret. Ellie stood alone on the wooden planks of Dust Creek Station, her two leather cases at her feet, her carefully planned future disappearing into the Wyoming horizon like smoke from the locomotive's stack. She had gotten off at the wrong station, Dust Creek instead of Silver Creek. 40 miles of high plains wilderness stood between her and Thomas Garrett, the rancher she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry, a man she'd never met, a man who didn't even know she'd arrived in the wrong town. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Bighorn Mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and copper. Beautiful, Ellie thought, in the way that loneliness is sometimes beautiful. The kind of beauty that makes your chest ache. The station consisted of little more than the platform itself, a small freight office that looked abandoned, and a single dirt road leading into what passed for a town. 3 buildings huddled together 100 yards away. 1 saloon, 1 general store, 1 building she couldn't identify. That was Dust Creek. Population unknown. Hope diminishing. Ellie smoothed her traveling dress, the deep blue silk that had cost 3 months of her teaching salary back in Philadelphia. She'd wanted to make a good impression on Thomas Garrett. Now the dress felt like a costume for a play that had been canceled mid-performance. She picked up her cases. They felt heavier now, weighted with all the what-ifs and should-haves she'd been carrying since Boston. The saloon bore a hand-painted sign that read, "Lucky Star." Ellie had never been inside a saloon in her life. Philadelphia ladies didn't frequent such establishments. But Philadelphia ladies also didn't find themselves stranded in the Wyoming Territory with $11 and no plan. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco smoke, whiskey, and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since breakfast in Cheyenne 12 hours ago. A woman stood behind the bar, Chinese, perhaps 40 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked up as Ellie entered, her expression shifting from wariness to curiosity. "You lost Miss," the woman's English carried only the faintest accent. "Comprehensively." Ellie managed a tired smile. "I need a room for 1 night, perhaps 2. I can pay." The woman studied her. "Sarah Chen. I run this place. We don't get many ladies through here, especially not ones dressed like you're going to the opera." Elena Hartford, though everyone calls me Ellie. She set down her cases. "And I was supposed to be going to a wedding, my own. Except I got off at the wrong station, and the next train isn't for 4 days, and I have no way to reach the man I'm supposed to marry." Sarah's expression softened. Mail-order bride, is it that obvious? Only to someone who's paying attention. Sarah poured coffee from a pot on the stove. "Sit. You look like you need this more than I do." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it was free, and Ellie wrapped her hands around the tin cup like it was salvation. "I can give you a room," Sarah said. $2 a night. That includes breakfast." The door banged open before Ellie could answer. A little girl burst through, all wild brown braids and dirt-smudged cheeks, wearing boys' clothes that had seen better days. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and she was crying. "Miss Sarah," the child's voice cracked with panic. "I'm lost. I can't find the camp. I can't find Papa." Sarah came around the bar, immediately kneeling to the girl's level. "Ruby Stone, what did I tell you about wandering off? I was just following a rabbit." Ruby's tears spilled over. "I didn't mean to get lost. I didn't mean to make Papa worry." Something in Ellie's chest shifted. She'd been a teacher for 5 years. She knew the sound of a frightened child. She set down her coffee and knelt beside Sarah. "Ruby," she kept her voice gentle, "my name is Ellie. Can you tell me what your Papa looks like?" Ruby turned tear-bright eyes on her. The crying stopped, replaced by something like wonder. "You smell like lavender." Yes, I suppose I do. Mama used to smell like that. Ruby's small hand reached out, touching the fabric of Ellie's sleeve. Before she got sick. Before she went to heaven. Sarah and Ellie exchanged glances over the child's head. "Ruby," Sarah said carefully, "where's your papa's camp?" "I don't know." The panic returned. "We were stopped near the creek where the cottonwoods are, but I walked and walked and now I can't find it. And Papa's going to be so worried and—" "Hush now." Ellie found herself pulling the child close without thinking. "We'll find your Papa, I promise." Ruby's arms wrapped around her neck, desperate and trusting in the way only children can be. "Are you the mama God sent? I've been praying every night. I asked for someone who smells like flowers and has a kind voice and—" "Ruby," Sarah's voice held gentle warning, "let's not get ahead of ourselves." But Ruby held on tighter. "You came on the train, didn't you? From far away, to be someone's new wife?" Ellie's throat tightened. "Yes, but—" "See?" Ruby pulled back just enough to look at her face. "God sent you. For me and Papa. I knew he would. I knew it. Sweetheart, that's not how—" But Ruby was already tugging her toward the door. "We have to go find Papa. He's probably looking for me. He gets scared when I wander off. He doesn't like to show it, but I can tell." Sarah grabbed a lantern from behind the bar. "I'll go with you. The stone camp is probably a mile out near Willow Creek. They're running cattle through here this week." The three of them set out into the gathering dusk. Ruby chattered the entire way, her fear apparently forgotten now that she had Ellie's hand clasped in her small, dirty fingers. "Papa's a trail boss," she explained proudly. "The best in Wyoming, maybe the best in the whole West. He can ride anything. He can rope anything. He can—" "Ruby," Sarah's voice held affection despite the interruption. "Breathe, child." The camp materialized out of the twilight like something from a storybook. 12 men clustered around a fire, their voices carrying across the plains in a low rumble. Horses nickered in a makeshift corral. The smell of coffee and beans drifted on the wind. A man stood apart from the others, pacing like a caged animal. Even in the fading light, Ellie could see the tension in every line of his body. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work-worn clothes and a battered hat pulled low. When he turned at the sound of their approach, his face caught the firelight. Hard lines, sharp cheekbones, eyes that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. This was a man carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. "Ruby!" His voice cracked like a whip. He crossed the distance in long strides, dropping to his knees to gather the child into his arms. "Don't you ever do that again. Do you understand me? Never." "I'm sorry, Papa." Ruby's voice was muffled against his chest. "I just wanted to see where the rabbit went." He held her at arm's length, checking for injuries with hands that trembled slightly. "You could have been hurt. You could have been lost all night. You could have—" "But I wasn't," Ruby pulled free, turning to beam at Ellie. "Because God sent her, just like I asked." The man's gaze finally lifted to Ellie. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Mid-30s, perhaps, but his eyes looked older, much older. He stood slowly, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I apologize for my daughter's enthusiasm, and I thank you for bringing her back safe." His voice was rough as creek gravel, but not unkind. Ellie found herself unable to look away from those gray eyes. They reminded her of winter skies before snow. "It was no trouble," she managed. "Ruby found us first, actually." Jack Stone. He didn't offer his hand, perhaps aware of how dirty it was. Trail boss for the 7x7 outfit out of Casper. Elena Hartford. Everyone calls me Ellie. And she hesitated. What was she exactly? I'm between situations at the moment. One corner of his mouth might have twitched. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Sarah, you taking her in for a few days." Sarah shifted the lantern. She got off at the wrong station. Meant to go to Silver Creek. Something flickered in Jack's expression. "Silver Creek's 40 miles. That's rough country if you don't know the trails." "Which is why she's staying in town until the next train." Sarah's tone brooked no argument. But Ruby had other ideas. She tugged on her father's sleeve. "Papa, she should stay here, with us. We have room by the fire and Cookie always makes too much food, and she could teach me things. She's a teacher, I can tell." "Ruby, that's not—" "How did you know I was a teacher?" Ellie asked, genuinely curious. Ruby's grin was triumphant. You have ink stains on your fingers, and you talk like books sound, and when you looked at me crying, you didn't look scared or annoyed. You looked like you wanted to help. That's what teachers do. An old man separated himself from the group by the fire, moving with the careful grace of someone whose joints had logged too many years in the saddle. His face was weathered as old leather, his eyes bright as creek water. "Jack Stone, you going to let these ladies stand out here all night, or are you going to remember your manners?" His voice carried the hint of an accent Ellie couldn't place. Irish, maybe, or Scottish. Jack's jaw tightened. Old iron. "Don't old iron me, boy. We got hot coffee and Ruby's safe. Least we can do is offer hospitality to the woman who brought her home." The old man tipped his hat to Ellie. "Cole Maddox, ma'am. Most folks call me Old Iron. Been riding with Jack's outfit going on 12 years now." "Miss Hartford was just heading back to town," Jack said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. But Ellie felt Ruby's hand slip into hers again, small and hopeful. She looked down at the upturned face, at the eyes that held such naked longing, it made her chest ache. "I could stay for coffee," she heard herself say, "if that's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Old Iron's smile creased his whole face. "Come on up to the fire. You look half frozen, and that's no kind of dress for Wyoming nights." The cowboys made space as they approached, removing hats, nodding respectfully. Rough men with kind eyes, Ellie noticed. The kind who probably had mothers and sisters back home somewhere. The kind who remembered what civilized behavior looked like even out here on the raw edge of nowhere. One of them handed her a tin cup of coffee. Another offered a seat on a smooth log someone had dragged close to the fire. Ruby settled beside her, pressed against her side like a small, warm shadow. Jack stood apart, arms crossed, watching. His expression was unreadable. Old Iron produced a battered guitar from somewhere and began to play. Nothing fancy, just simple chords that matched the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of men's voices. The music settled over the camp like a blanket, soft and familiar. "Do you know any songs, Miss Ellie?" Ruby's question was almost a whisper, as if she was afraid of the answer. Ellie thought of the songs she'd sung to her students back in Philadelphia. Thought of the music lessons her mother had insisted on, back when there was still money for such things, before the fever took her parents, before the world became a harder, lonelier place. "A few," she said. "Would you sing one, please? Papa tries, but—" Ruby glanced at her father, lowering her voice even more. "He sounds like a bullfrog with a stomachache." A bark of laughter escaped one of the cowboys before he could stifle it. Even Jack's stern expression cracked slightly. "Ruby Marie Stone." His voice held warning, but also something that might have been amusement. "It's true, Papa. You said so yourself." Old Iron played a soft chord, looked at Ellie with encouragement in his eyes. "We could all use a bit of beauty out here, miss, if you're willing." The men had gone quiet, waiting. Ellie felt the weight of their attention, their hope. These were men far from home, doing hard work for little pay, sleeping on the ground, under stars that offered light but no comfort. If she could give them a few minutes of something gentler. She began to sing, softly at first, then stronger as the melody found her. Shenandoah, her father's favorite, the song about longing and rivers and the ache of distance. Her voice carried across the camp clear and true. The cowboys stilled. The horses in the corral seemed to quiet. Even the wind dropped to listen. When the last note faded, no one spoke for a long moment. Ruby's eyes were wide. "That was beautiful." Old Iron nodded slowly. "Ma'am, you just gave 12 homesick cowboys a piece of home. That's no small gift." Ellie felt her cheeks warm. "It's just a song. Nothing's just anything out here." This from Jack, his voice rougher than before. "Everything matters more when you're living this close to the edge." Their eyes met across the fire. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The knowledge that they were both people who'd lost things, who carried grief like stones in their pockets. Ruby yawned against Ellie's shoulder, her energy finally spent. Ellie found herself smoothing the child's wild hair without thinking the gesture automatic after years of teaching. "I should get her to bed," Jack said, moving closer, "and you should get back to town before it's full dark." "I'll walk her back." Old Iron stood, joints creaking audibly. "Sarah probably closed up an hour ago, but she'll let me bang on the door." As Ellie stood to leave, Ruby grabbed her hand one more time. "Will you come back tomorrow? Please, you could teach me reading. I'm not very good at it, and Papa tries, but he's too busy with the cattle." Ellie looked at Jack. He was studying his daughter with an expression she couldn't quite read. Love, certainly. Exhaustion, absolutely. But something else. Something that looked almost like longing. "I don't think that's—" she began. $20. Jack's words cut through the night air. "I'll pay you $20 to travel with us to Cheyenne. 3 weeks on the trail. Teach Ruby her letters, her numbers, whatever else she needs. Keep her out of trouble while I'm working." Ellie blinked. "You can't be serious." "Do I look like I joke much, Miss Hartford?" He didn't. Not even a little bit. "But I'm supposed to. I have to get to Silver Creek." "Cheyenne's on the way. You can catch a train there easy as anywhere else. Probably easier." He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through dark hair that needed cutting. "Look, I'm not much for pretty words, but Ruby needs more than I can give her right now. She needs school learning. She needs someone who knows how to talk proper. She needs—" He trailed off, looking at his daughter with such naked vulnerability that Ellie felt her heart crack a little. "She needs a woman's influence," he finished quietly, "even if it's just for 3 weeks. "Papa's trying to say you'd be helping us," Ruby supplied helpfully. "He's not good at asking for help. Mama used to say he'd rather eat nails than admit he needed anything." Despite everything, Ellie smiled. "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Ruby's voice went soft. Do you think she'd like you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Ellie thought of all the things she'd lost. Her parents. Her fiancé who'd left her for a woman with a bigger dowry. Her teaching position when the school decided they couldn't afford to keep her on. All the small deaths that had led her to answer Thomas Garrett's advertisement for a mail-order bride. She thought of getting on that train tomorrow, continuing to Silver Creek, meeting a stranger, building a life on obligations and contracts. Then she thought of Ruby's small hand in hers, of Jack's winter gray eyes, of the way the Cowboys had listened to her sing like it mattered. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. 3 weeks. Cheyenne, $20. Ruby's shriek of joy probably scared every animal within a mile radius. Jack's expression didn't change much, but something in his shoulders relaxed. "We leave at dawn. Can you ride?" "No." "Can you cook over a fire?" "No." "Can you handle a gun?" "Absolutely not." His mouth twitched again. Definitely a smile this time, even if it barely showed. "Well, Miss Hartford, you're in for an education." After Old Iron walked her back to the Lucky Star, after Sarah had raised her eyebrows, but asked no questions, after Ellie had climbed the stairs to her small rented room, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and wondered what she'd just agreed to. 3 weeks with a trail crew, learning to ride, learning to survive. Teaching a motherless child who decided Ellie was an answer to prayer. Working alongside a hard, quiet man who looked at her like she was both a problem and a possibility. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt alive. Ellie didn't know yet about Vivian Blackwood, watching from the shadows of the general store as she'd walked back to the Lucky Star. Didn't know about the woman who'd come to Dust Creek with plans to build an empire on other people's losses. Didn't know that the wrong station might have been the right one after all. But she'd find out soon enough. Tomorrow the trail would teach her things Philadelphia never could. About strength, about survival, about what it meant to find family in the last place you expected. Tomorrow everything would change. Tonight, for the first time since leaving Boston, Elena Hartford slept without dreams of what she'd left behind. She dreamed instead of what might lie ahead. Dawn broke cold and clean over the Wyoming plains. Ellie stood outside the Lucky Star with her 2 leather cases, wearing her second-best traveling dress, and boots that had never seen mud. The dress was sensible wool at least. The boots would learn about mud soon enough. Jack Stone arrived with a horse he introduced as Clementine. The mare was patient-eyed and gentle, which Ellie suspected was intentional. She also suspected Jack had chosen the oldest, calmest horse in the entire remuda specifically for the city woman who'd never sat a saddle in her life. "She won't throw you," he said. "Probably." That's tremendously reassuring. Ruby sat astride her own pony like she'd been born there. At 8 years old, she rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. "It's easy, Miss Ellie. You just have to tell the horse you're friends." "I'll keep that in mind." The first attempt to mount Clementine ended with Ellie's boot caught in the stirrup and her dignity sprawled in the dust. The second attempt wasn't much better. By the third, Jack had moved to help, his large hand steadying her waist as she swung up into the saddle. "Feet in the stirrups, reins loose but not slack. Sit up straight or your back'll hate you by noon." His instructions were curt, efficient. "And try not to death grip the saddle horn. Clementine can tell when you're scared." "I'm not scared." "You're terrified. But you're doing it anyway. That counts for something." 3 cowboys rode past, hiding smiles behind their hands. Ellie's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin up. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Learning was survival. The trail drive began with organized chaos. 1,200 head of cattle moving north toward Cheyenne, a river of muscle and horn and dust that stretched half a mile. The cowboys worked the herd with practiced efficiency, their horses dancing around the edges, keeping stragglers in line. Ellie and Ruby rode near the chuck wagon, well away from the main action. Cookie, a bow-legged man of indeterminate age, drove the wagon with one hand and smoked a pipe with the other. "First trail drive?" he asked around the pipe stem. "Is it that obvious? You're sitting that saddle like you expect it to bite you. Relax. Clementine knows what she's doing, even if you don't." Ruby spent the morning teaching Ellie trail wisdom, how to read the sky for weather, how to tell when the cattle were nervous, how to spot water from the way birds circled. The child had absorbed trail lore the way other children learned their letters. "Papa says knowing the land keeps you alive," Ruby explained seriously. "City folks don't understand that everything talks if you know how to listen." By midday, Ellie's thighs burned like fire. Her back ached in muscles she hadn't known existed. When they stopped to water the herd, she dismounted with all the grace of a sack of flour and nearly collapsed when her legs refused to hold her weight. Old Iron caught her elbow. "First day's always the hardest. Tomorrow you'll only hurt twice as bad. Day after that you might feel human again." "You're a terrible liar, Mr. Maddox." "Never said I was good at it." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "But you're still here. That's more than some can say." That evening, after the herd had been bedded down and the camp established, Ellie sat with Ruby beside the fire. The child had a primer that was held together more by hope than binding. They worked through words by firelight while the men ate their beans and cornbread in comfortable silence. "Sound it out," Ellie encouraged. "What does that word say?" Ruby squinted at the page. "Beau, beautiful, beautiful, exactly right." "Like you." Ruby's smile was gap-toothed and utterly sincere. "You're beautiful." "That's what Papa said to Old Iron. He thought I was asleep, but I heard him. He said you were beautiful and brave, and he didn't know what to make of you." Across the fire, Jack had gone very still. Old Iron coughed into his coffee. Ellie kept her eyes on the primer. "Your papa is kind, but you shouldn't eavesdrop on grown-up conversations." "I know. Mama used to say the same thing. But grown-ups say more interesting things when they think kids aren't listening." By the third day, Ellie could mount Clementine without assistance. By the fifth, the burning in her muscles had settled into a dull, manageable ache. By the seventh, she realized she hadn't thought about Thomas Garrett or Silver Creek in 2 whole days. The trail taught her things Philadelphia never could. How to tie a bedroll that wouldn't come undone. How to make coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. how to read the moods of 1,200 cattle by the way they moved, how to exist with 12 men and maintain dignity without walls or doors or privacy beyond what courtesy provided. The cowboys treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence. They didn't curse when she was near. They took turns walking perimeter at night so she could sleep without fear. They brought her wildflowers they found on the trail presented with rough gallantry that made her throat tight. Jack watched it all with those winter-gray eyes, saying little missing, nothing. On the 9th night, storm clouds gathered on the western horizon like bruises. The air turned heavy and electric. The cattle grew restless, milling and lowing their unease. "We're in for it," Old Iron said, scanning the sky. "Bad one, too. I can feel it in my bones." Jack began issuing orders with crisp efficiency. "Double the night watch. Get the remuda secured. Ellie, you and Ruby stay with the wagon. Cookie, make sure everything's tied down." The storm hit an hour after full dark. Lightning cracked the sky, open thunder rolling across the plains like artillery fire. Rain fell in sheets so thick Ellie could barely see the fire 6 feet away. Then the cattle started to run. She'd heard about stampedes. Every cowboy story she'd ever read mentioned them. But reading about terror and living through it were entirely different things. The ground shook. The sound was like the end of the world, 1,200 animals moving as one massive, unstoppable force. In the lightning flashes, Ellie saw cowboys racing alongside the herd, trying to turn them, trying to control the chaos. Ruby pressed against her side, small and shaking. "Papa's out there. He knows what he's doing. People die in stampedes. Cowboys get thrown, get trampled. Mama used to worry every time there was a storm." Ellie wrapped her arms around the child, holding tight. "Your papa's smart. He'll be careful." But through the rain and lightning, she could see the herd was heading straight for a washout, a gully that would break legs and necks if the cattle plunged into it blind. She saw Jack at the head of the stampede, trying to turn the leaders, saw his horse stumble, saw him thrown forward, rolling the herd bearing down. Ellie didn't think. She grabbed a lantern from the wagon, lit it, despite the rain, and ran toward the stampede, toward the gully, toward certain death if this didn't work. She planted herself at the edge of the washout, swinging the lantern in wide arcs, screaming at the top of her lungs. The light caught the rain, multiplied, became a beacon of warning in the darkness. The lead steers saw her, saw the light, saw the edge of the gully illuminated just enough. They turned. The herd followed, flowing around her like water around a stone, missing the washout by yards. The thunder of hooves faded into the distance as the cowboys turned them, circled them, brought them under control. Jack appeared out of the rain on foot, limping. His hat was gone. His face was cut, but he was alive. He stared at Ellie like he'd never seen her before. "You could have been killed." His voice was raw. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking you were about to be trampled and someone needed to do something, so you ran toward a stampede." It seemed logical at the time. He reached out, gripped her shoulders, his hands shaking. "You're no city lady. You're trail tough. He stopped, seemed to remember himself, stepped back. "You saved my life. Maybe saved the whole herd." Old Iron approached, leading Jack's horse. "Never seen anything like that. Woman with more guts than sense. You'll fit right in with this outfit, Miss Ellie." The storm passed. The herd settled. By dawn, they'd recovered all but 20 head, which was better than anyone had hoped. Ellie found Jack sitting alone by the rebuilt fire, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. She sat beside him without asking permission. "You're hurt." "I've been worse." "That's not an answer." He looked at her, then really looked. "Why'd you do it? Run toward the stampede? Ruby needed her father. The crew needed their boss. It seemed necessary." Necessary. He tested the word. Rose used to say that. When I'd question why she did something dangerous or difficult, she'd say it was necessary, like that explained everything. This was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name in Ellie's presence. She held very still, afraid to break the moment. "She'd have liked you," he continued quietly. "She'd have appreciated that you didn't hesitate, that you acted. Rose was like that. All action, no fear. Or maybe all fear, but she did it anyway. He rubbed his face with both hands. I miss her every damn day, but especially nights like this when something happens and I want to tell her about it and she's just gone. Ellie's own losses rose up familiar as breath. My parents died of fever when I was 18. For years afterward, I'd see something beautiful or funny and think, I have to tell Mother before remembering. The forgetting and then remembering was worse than just remembering. Yes, the word came out like relief. Exactly that. They sat in companionable silence as the dawn turned the sky from black to gray to gold. Ruby emerged from the wagon sleepy-eyed and curled up between them without speaking. This, Ellie thought, this was the moment, when three separate people became something more, when grief recognized grief and didn't look away. 2 weeks into the journey, they reached the Laramie Plains, endless grassland rolling toward mountains that looked close enough to touch but stayed forever distant. The cattle grazed contentedly. The weather held fair. Ruby's reading had improved dramatically. She could work through simple sentences now, sounding out words with determined concentration. Her penmanship was still atrocious, but Ellie was working on that too. Why do letters have to look pretty? Ruby complained one evening. As long as people can read them, what does it matter? Because presentation matters. Because taking care with small things teaches you to take care with large things. Because your mother would want you to have every advantage, including beautiful handwriting. Ruby considered this. Did you know my mama? No, sweetheart. But you talk about her like you did, like you knew what she'd want. Ellie chose her words carefully. I know she loved you. I know she'd want you to have every opportunity to grow up strong and smart and capable. That's what all good mothers want. Are you going to be a good mother when you marry that man in Silver Creek? The question landed like a stone in still water rippling outward. Ellie realized she hadn't thought about Thomas Garrett in days, hadn't wondered what he looked like or what kind of man he was, hadn't imagined the life they might build together. I don't know, she said honestly. I hope so. I think you would be. Ruby leaned against her shoulder. You're patient, you're kind. You don't get mad when I ask too many questions. That's what good mothers are like. Jack's voice carried from across the camp, calling Ruby to help with evening chores. The child scampered off, leaving Ellie alone with thoughts that felt increasingly like betrayal. She'd made a promise to Thomas Garrett, made an agreement. A woman's word should mean something, but her heart was starting to argue otherwise. Cheyenne rose from the plains like a promise kept. Streets and buildings, and the blessed permanence of civilization. The stockyards sprawled on the southern edge, a maze of pens and chutes where fortunes changed hands and beef became money. Jack sold his cattle for a good price. Ellie watched from a distance as he negotiated, noting the way other men respected him, the way his words seemed to carry weight. That evening, while Jack met with the buyer to finalize paperwork, Ellie took Ruby into town for a proper bath at the hotel. They emerged clean and human. Ruby's wild hair finally tamed into something resembling braids. The telegraph office stood across from the hotel. Ellie found herself walking toward it, Ruby's hand in hers. Are you going to tell the man you're here? Ruby asked quietly. I should. But you don't want to. It's not about wanting, it's about what's right. Ruby stopped walking, tugged Ellie down to her level. Miss Ellie, Mama used to say that sometimes the right thing and the want thing are the same thing, and sometimes choosing what you want is the bravest kind of right there is. You're very wise for 8 years old. I had a good mama, and now I have a good you. Ellie's heart cracked wide open. She pulled Ruby close, holding tight this fierce little girl who'd claimed her from the first moment. Inside the telegraph office, the clerk looked up with professional disinterest. Help you, ma'am. I need to send a telegram to Silver Creek, to Thomas Garrett. Go ahead. Ellie took the pencil, stared at the blank form. Her hand wouldn't move. couldn't move, because sending this telegram meant the end of something that had barely begun, meant leaving Jack and Ruby and the strange, unexpected family they'd become on the trail, meant choosing obligation over desire, propriety over passion. She set down the pencil. "Miss," the clerk prompted. "I'm sorry, I've changed my mind." Back on the street, Ruby looked up at her with knowing eyes. "You didn't send it." "No, because you want to stay with us." "Ruby, it's not that simple." "Isn't it Papa likes you? I like you. You like us. Why does it have to be more complicated than that?" "Because life was always more complicated than that." Because Ellie had seen a telegram on the desk at the cattle buyer's office, half hidden under papers. A telegram from someone named Vivian Blackwood to the Cheyenne Bank. A telegram that mentioned Jack Stone by name, that mentioned debt and foreclosure and 30 days. She'd only glimpsed it for a moment, but it had been enough. That night she found Jack alone by the hotel, smoking a cigarette and watching the stars. "Can I ask you something?" She kept her voice neutral. "Reckon you just did. Are you in trouble? Financial trouble?" His shoulders went rigid. The cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. "Where'd you hear that?" "I saw a telegram. At the buyer's office. It wasn't addressed to you, but it mentioned your name. Something about debt." He was quiet for a long time. Then he crushed out the cigarette with more force than necessary. "I owe the bank $800. Borrowed it 3 years back to expand the herd after Rose died. Thought I could make it work. Thought—" He shook his head. "Turns out grief makes you a poor businessman. The note comes due in 2 months. If I can't pay, I lose the ranch." The ranch? Dust Creek Ranch. It's not much. Small place, but it's ours. Was supposed to be Ruby's inheritance someday. Now. He made a helpless gesture. "I got enough from this cattle sale to hold the bank off for a bit, but not enough to clear the debt. Not nearly enough." "What will you do?" "Keep working. Keep trying. Keep hoping something breaks my way for once." He looked at her. "But that's not your problem, Miss Ellie. You got your own life waiting in Silver Creek." "About that." She took a breath. "I didn't send the telegram to Thomas Garrett. I couldn't." The air between them changed, became charged with possibility. "Why not?" His voice had gone rough. "Because these 3 weeks have been the most alive I've felt since my parents died. Because Ruby looks at me like I matter. Because you—" She stopped, gathered courage. "Because when I think about the future, I don't see Thomas Garrett anymore. I see campfires and trail dust, and a little girl who needs someone to braid her hair properly." Jack stepped closer. "Ellie, I know it's foolish. I know you have debt and trouble and a complicated life. I know I'm supposed to keep my promise to a man I've never met. But Ruby was right. Sometimes choosing what you want is the bravest kind of right there is." He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "If you stay, there's no guarantee, no safety net. Could lose everything. I already lost everything once. It taught me that safety is an illusion. The only real thing is what you're willing to fight for." He kissed her, then slow and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. She kissed him back, tasting coffee and tobacco and promise. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "Best decision you ever made, Miss Ellie. We'll see about that." But she was smiling. So was he. Tomorrow the real trouble would begin. Tomorrow they'd face Vivian Blackwood and debt and all the ways the world could break good people. Tonight, under the Wyoming stars, Elena Hartford chose love over security, hope over certainty, and a ready-made family over a stranger's promise. The train whistle blew in the distance, heading toward Silver Creek without her. She didn't look back. The ranch appeared on the horizon like something from a faded photograph, small and weathered, built from logs and hope, and the kind of stubbornness that kept people alive in hard country. Dust Creek Ranch sat in a valley where the mountains met the plains, where water ran year-round, and grass grew thick enough to sustain a modest herd. Ellie's first thought was that it looked lonely. Her second was that it looked like home. The house was single-story functional, rather than beautiful, a porch wrapped around two sides, the wood silvered by sun and wind. The barn stood solid despite its age, the corrals well-maintained. Someone had planted cottonwoods years ago. They'd grown tall enough now to offer shade, their leaves whispering secrets in the October wind. "It's not much," Jack said, and she could hear the apology in his voice. Rose had plans to fix it up proper, add a second story, build a real kitchen, but then she got sick, and after, he trailed off, it's been just me and Ruby keeping things together. Ruby had already leaped from her horse and was racing toward the house, throwing open the door like she was releasing something caged. "Come see Miss Ellie. Come see everything." The interior smelled of wood smoke and coffee and the particular emptiness of a house missing a woman's touch. The furniture was plain but sturdy. Everything was clean, she noticed. Jack might not know about curtains or decorations, but he kept his home tidy. That said something about a man. "Mama's sewing room is here." Ruby pushed open a door to reveal a small space with a single window facing east. Morning light would flood this room. Papa never changed anything. He said it felt wrong to move her things. A basket of fabric scraps sat in the corner. Half-finished projects lay folded on a shelf. This had been Rose Stone's sanctuary, and it had been preserved like a shrine. "You could use it," Jack said quietly from the doorway. "For your school, if you're serious about teaching the local kids." "I'm serious." Ellie turned to face him. "If there are children who need learning, I can provide it. That's what I know how to do." Word spread faster than wildfire in territory country. By the end of the first week, 6 children appeared at the ranch house every morning, carried there by parents who saw opportunity in the arrival of a real teacher from Philadelphia. The children ranged from 5 to 12, carrying primers and slates, their eyes bright with the hunger for knowledge that Ellie remembered from her own students back east. She taught reading and arithmetic, history and penmanship. She taught them that education was power, that words could open doors, that knowing things made you dangerous in the best possible way. Ruby thrived. Having other children around transformed her from a lonely girl playing at being a cowboy to a leader among her peers. She helped the younger ones with their letters. She showed them how to track animals by their prints. She was bridge and translator between Ellie's city knowledge and the harsh practical wisdom of ranch life. One morning, Ellie arrived at the schoolroom to find Ruby wearing a dress. An actual dress, faded calico, that must have belonged to her mother, taken in with uneven stitches. "You're wearing a dress." Ellie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Ruby's chin lifted defensively. "You said proper young ladies wear dresses to school." "I did, but I also said being proper was less important than being yourself. I can be both." Ruby lifted the hem to reveal her battered cowboy boots underneath. "See, dress on top, ready to ride on the bottom. Best of both worlds." The other children giggled. Ellie bit back a smile. "That's actually quite ingenious." "That's what Papa said. He said you have to be adaptable to survive out here, so I'm adapting." Ruby sat at her desk with exaggerated primness boots clunking against the chair legs. "I'm a lady cowboy, or a cowboy lady. I haven't decided which sounds better." It was such a small thing, this child trying to bridge two worlds, but it cracked something open in Ellie's chest. Ruby was trying to be what she thought Ellie wanted while staying true to who she was. The effort was heartbreaking and brave and absolutely perfect. That evening, after the students had been collected by their parents and the schoolroom cleaned, Ellie found Jack in the barn tending to a horse with a strained leg. "Your daughter wore a dress today." He glanced up, surprise flickering across his face. "Did she now?" "With her boots. She said she was adapting." His laugh was brief but genuine. "That's Ruby. Can't ever do things halfway. If she's going to be civilized, she'll do it on her own terms." Ellie leaned against the stall door watching him work. His hands were gentle with the injured animal, massaging the leg with practiced care. "Jack, I need to ask you something." "That usually means I'm not going to like the question. What are we doing? You and me." He went still. The horse snorted, sensing the tension. I mean, Ellie continued, I'm living in your house, teaching your daughter, cooking meals and mending clothes, and she made a helpless gesture. What exactly am I to you? The hired help, a friend. Something more. Jack set down the horse's leg and stood slowly. What do you want to be? That's not an answer. No, but it's the important question. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. I'm not good with pretty words, Ellie. Never have been. But I'll tell you plain. Having you here, it feels right. Like something broken got fixed without me noticing. Ruby's happy. The house feels lived in again. And he stopped, gathered himself. I wake up looking forward to coffee because you'll be there drinking it. That's not nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. No, that's not nothing. But I got debt hanging over my head like a noose. Got a ranch that might not be mine come winter. Got a daughter who needs stability, not more uncertainty. He cupped her face in one calloused hand. I got nothing to offer you except hard work and harder times ahead. That's the truth of it. She turned her face into his palm. What if I don't need offers? What if I just need honesty and a place to belong? Then I reckon we got ourselves an understanding. Is that a proposal, Jack Stone? Not yet, but it will be, when I got something to offer besides hope and stubbornness. He leaned down, rested his forehead against hers. But if you're asking whether I want you to stay, whether I see a future with you in it, the answer's yes. Plain and simple yes. Then yes back. She smiled against his skin. Plain and simple. Ruby's voice carried from the house. Are you two kissing? Because if you are, you should probably do it proper. Mama always said if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Jack pulled back, shouting toward the house. Ruby Marie, mind your own business. You are my business. Both of you, that makes this my business too. Despite everything, Ellie laughed. This strange patchwork family they were building. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she left Philadelphia. It was something better, something real. November arrived with frost and shortened days. Ellie and Ruby began planning a Christmas wedding. Nothing elaborate. Just a simple ceremony in Dust Creek's small church with the whole town invited. Ruby threw herself into preparations with characteristic intensity, drawing invitation cards decorated with elaborate, if anatomically questionable, horses and flowers. Everyone has to come, she insisted carefully, lettering each name. Mrs. Chen and Cookie and Old Iron and all the kids from school and their parents and... Ruby breathed. Ellie guided her hand, helping with the more difficult letters. We have time. Christmas is still 6 weeks away. But what if something happens? What if that mean lady comes back? Ellie's pen paused. What mean lady? The one who came to town asking questions about Papa. Mrs. Chen told me about her. Said she was beautiful like a snake is beautiful, all shiny and dangerous. Before Ellie could respond, the sound of horses outside drew their attention. Through the window she saw a carriage expensive and out of place in this rough country. 2 figures descended. One was a woman in her 40s dressed in severe black, her face etched with permanent disapproval. The other was a thin man carrying a leather portfolio. Jack emerged from the barn wiping his hands on his pants. Even from a distance, Ellie could see him go rigid. She moved to the door, Ruby pressed against her side. The woman's voice carried across the yard, sharp as broken glass. Jackson, I see you're still playing at rancher while my sister's child runs wild. Beatrice. Jack's voice was carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Is it I wrote to tell you I was coming? Perhaps the letter got lost in all this. She gestured vaguely at the ranch, the implication clear. This chaos. This disorder. Ruby's not wild. She's being educated. By whom? Some stranger you picked up on the trail. Beatrice's eyes found Ellie in the doorway. Yes, I heard about your Philadelphia school teacher. How convenient that she arrived just when you needed someone to make your situation look respectable. Ellie stepped onto the porch, keeping Ruby behind her. I'm Elena Hartford, and you are Beatrice Stone, Ruby's aunt, her blood family, not some opportunistic woman looking for a meal ticket. The words stung, designed to wound. But Ellie had faced down boarding school headmistresses and wealthy parents who thought teachers were servants. She knew how to keep her spine straight and her voice level. "I'm here because Ruby needed a teacher and I needed a purpose. If that makes me opportunistic, I'll wear the label proudly." The thin man stepped forward. "Gerald Whitmore, attorney at law. Mrs. Stone has retained my services regarding concerns about her niece's welfare." "What concerns?" Jack's voice had gone dangerous. Beatrice produced papers from her bag. "It's come to my attention that you're living in sin with this woman, that Ruby is being exposed to an immoral situation, that you've dragged her across dangerous territory on cattle drives, that you're facing financial ruin. These are not conditions suitable for raising a child. I'm her father, a father who prioritizes his own desires over his daughter's well-being." Beatrice's voice dripped false concern. "I'm prepared to offer Ruby a proper home, in Boston, with family who can give her education refinement opportunities you never could." Ruby's hand clutched Ellie's skirt. "I'm not going anywhere." "Sweetheart, adults are talking." "I don't care. I'm not leaving, Papa." "I'm not leaving, Miss Ellie. This is my home." Before Beatrice could respond, another rider appeared. This one wore elegance like armor, dark hair swept up under a fashionable hat. Riding habit that cost more than most ranchers made in a year. She sat her horse like a queen, surveying conquered territory. "Jack Stone." The woman's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "We meet at last." "Vivian Blackwood." Jack's voice was flat. "Should have known you'd be behind this." Vivian dismounted with practiced grace. "Behind what Mrs. Stone's legitimate concerns about her niece, I'm simply here to help." She moved closer, her eyes assessing Ellie with the interest of someone examining livestock. "You must be the mail-order bride who never made it to her intended. How fortunate that you found a new situation so quickly." "Miss Hartford is going to be my wife," Jack said. "Not that it's any of your business." "Wife? How charming." Vivian's laugh was musical and cruel. "Tell me, Jack, can you afford a wife? Can you afford anything right now? Because my understanding is that you owe the bank $800, a debt that comes due in 30 days. Ellie felt the words land like blows, saw Jack's jaw tighten. "I'll manage." "Will you?" "Because I have a proposal. A generous one." Vivian circled him like a predator. "I'll pay your debt. Clear it entirely. In exchange, you work for me. Trail boss for my new cattle operation, 9 months a year on the trail. The other 3 you can visit your daughter at her aunt's house in Boston." "No." "Think about it, Jack. Financial security. Ruby's future assured. All you have to do is accept help. From someone who wants to take everything I have. That's not help. That's theft, dressed up pretty." Beatrice stepped forward. "You're being stubborn and foolish. Think of Ruby." "I am thinking of Ruby." Jack's control cracked. "I'm thinking she needs her father, needs a home, needs to grow up knowing who she is, not who some city aunt thinks she should be." "She needs stability," Beatrice insisted, "not some delusional fantasy about playing house with a stranger." Ruby pulled free from Ellie and ran to her father. "Papa, don't let them take me. Please, I'll be good. I'll be so good. I'll wear dresses every day and learn proper manners and everything. Just please don't send me away." Jack gathered her close. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." Vivian's expression hardened. "Then you condemn her to poverty, to watching you lose this ranch, to becoming homeless. Is that what you want for your daughter? What I want is for you both to leave my property." "This property." Vivian pulled papers from her bag. "I'm afraid it's not yours for much longer. I've purchased your debt from the bank. That gives me certain rights, including the right to demand payment in full within 30 days. If you can't pay," she smiled. "Well, foreclosure is such an ugly word." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Old Iron's voice broke the spell. There might be another way. Everyone turned. The old cowboy stood at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, his weathered face thoughtful. "What way?" Jack asked. "Wild mustangs, up in the Bighorn Mountains, armies buying horses for the cavalry, good money. $1.50 a head for broke horses, $1 for unbroken." That's impossible, Vivian scoffed. Wild Mustang hunts take months. You have 30 days. 3 weeks, Old Iron corrected. If we move fast, small crew, know the country, know where the big herds run. He looked at Jack. It's risky. Winter's coming. Mountains are dangerous. But I reckon we could catch 80, maybe 100 head if luck runs our way. That's enough to clear your debt with room to spare. Jack was quiet, calculating. We'd need supplies, fresh horses, a crew willing to work for shares instead of wages. I'm willing, Old Iron grinned. Been itching for one last adventure before these bones give out completely. Ellie heard herself speak before she'd fully decided. I'm going too. Every eye turned to her. Absolutely not, Jack said. It's too dangerous. You said we're partners. Partners work together. Partners keep each other alive. The mountains in November, wild horses, the risk of early snow. He shook his head. I won't take that chance with you. Then don't take it at all. She met his eyes unflinching. Ruby needs her father more than you need that ranch. There has to be another way. There isn't. His voice was bleak. I either raise the money or I lose everything. Ruby's home, her inheritance, any chance of building the life Rose wanted for her. Vivian's smile widened. How touching. Domestic drama at its finest. But the clock is ticking, Jack. 30 days. Then this ranch, these buildings, this land, all mine. She mounted her horse with insulting ease. Beatrice followed, pausing long enough to say, When you fail, and you will fail, I'll be waiting, ready to give Ruby the life she deserves. After they'd gone, the three of them stood in the yard. Ruby was crying quietly against Jack's chest. Ellie felt fury and fear warring in her stomach. When do we leave? She kept her voice steady. Jack looked at her. Ellie, no. We're partners. You said so yourself. I can shoot now. I can ride. I can survive. And Ruby needs both of us to come back. She moved closer, took his free hand. Don't shut me out. Not when it matters most. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded just once. We leave in 3 days. Get warm clothes, good boots. Say goodbye to your students. That night they told Ruby the plan. She listened with the gravity of someone much older. How long will you be gone? 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the weather turns. Jack smoothed her hair. Mrs. Chen will look after you in town. You'll keep up with your studies. And then you'll come back and we'll have Christmas and the wedding and everything will be fine. That's the plan. Ruby looked at Ellie. Promise you'll keep him safe. I promise. And Papa, you promise you'll keep Miss Ellie safe. With my life. Ruby nodded, satisfied in the way children are when adults give them concrete assurances. Then I'm not worried. You both keep your promises. Later, after Ruby was asleep, Ellie found Jack on the porch. The stars were infinite, overhead cold, and indifferent, and beautiful. Having second thoughts? He asked. About what you or the Mustang hunt or throwing away my chance at a safe, boring life with Thomas Garrett. Any of it. She leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth in the cold night. Not even for a second. You're crazy. You know that. Probably. But I'm your kind of crazy. He kissed her, then deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, his voice was rough. If something happens to me up there, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, promise me you'll look after Ruby, not as hired help or a teacher, as family. Promise me. I promise. But Jack, you're coming back. We both are. And then we're getting married and raising that stubborn, brilliant little girl together and building something that woman can never touch. Yes, ma'am. 3 days later, they rode out before dawn. Jack, Ellie, Old Iron, and 4 other cowboys willing to gamble on shares. Ruby stood with Sarah Chen in front of the Lucky Star, waving until they disappeared over the horizon. The Bighorn Mountains waited white-capped and merciless. Winter was coming, and they were riding straight into its teeth. The Bighorn Mountains rose before them like the spine of some ancient sleeping giant. Snow already crowned the highest peaks white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. November had arrived early in the high country, bringing frost that clung to the grass each morning and ice that formed in the water buckets overnight. 7 days of tracking, 7 days of cold camps and hard riding and scanning the endless valleys for signs of wild horses. The mustangs were ghosts, leaving only hoof prints and droppings to prove they existed at all. Ellie had stopped feeling her toes somewhere around day 3. By day 5, her hands were cracked and bleeding despite the gloves. By day 7, she'd forgotten what warmth felt like. But she didn't complain, not when Jack's face grew more drawn each morning, not when the weight of 30 days and $800 pressed down on all of them like the gathering storm clouds. Old Iron was their tracker, reading the land like other men read newspapers. He'd point to a patch of disturbed earth and say, 20 head, maybe 25 moving northeast. Or he'd examine droppings and declare, fresh, 6 hours old. They're close. On the 8th morning, they found them. The herd appeared in a valley carved by ancient glaciers, surrounded by walls of stone that funneled down to a narrow opening. 180 horses, maybe more, bays and blacks and piebalds, their coats shaggy with winter growth. The stallion stood apart, watching his mares with eyes that missed nothing. "That's our payday," one of the cowboys breathed, "if we can catch them." Big if. Jack studied the terrain with the focused intensity Ellie had come to recognize. His mind was working, calculating angles and distances and possibilities. That canyon's natural trap, but getting them into it without spooking the whole herd into next week, that's the trick. "We could drive them," another cowboy suggested. "Circle around, push them toward the narrows." "Too many escape routes. They'd scatter." Jack shook his head. "We need them to go willing, or at least not panicked enough to break bones trying to escape." Ellie had been studying the valley while the men talked. There was something about the way the land lay, the way the canyon walls curved, like cupped hands almost closing. She thought about the books she'd read on animal behavior, thought about how horses think, how they move. "What if we don't drive them?" Her voice was quiet but clear. "What if we lead them?" The men turned to look at her. "Horses are herd animals," she continued. "They follow. If we could get 1 or 2 into the canyon, make it look safe, the others might follow." Jack's eyes narrowed, considering. "Go on." "We have that paint mare, the gentle one. She's calm, not threatening. What if we walked her into the canyon slow and easy, let the wild ones see there's nothing to fear? Then station riders at intervals to keep them moving forward once they commit." Old Iron began to smile. "Girl's got a point. Mustangs are curious creatures. See one of their own moving confident like, they might just investigate." "It's risky," Jack said, but Ellie could hear him working through the logistics. "If they spook part way through, we could start a stampede in confined space. Horses would get trampled, men too. Riskier than going home empty-handed." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure we need to try." They spent the rest of the day preparing, positioning men at strategic points along the canyon, setting up a rope corral at the narrow end where the walls pinched close enough to string barriers. Every detail mattered, every angle calculated. As the sun dropped toward the western peaks, painting everything gold and crimson, they began. Ellie rode the paint mare slow and steady into the valley. Behind her, at a distance, Old Iron and 2 cowboys followed on their quietest horses. The wild herd watched, ears pricked, muscles tense with the possibility of flight. The stallion screamed a warning. Half the herd shifted, ready to run. Ellie kept riding, kept the mare calm and easy, like this was the most natural thing in the world, like there was nothing to fear. The mare grazed as they walked, pulling at the sparse grass, showing the wild ones that there was food here, safety here. Slowly, achingly slowly, the mustangs began to follow. First one curious mare, then another. Then a yearling colt who couldn't resist investigating. The stallion tried to herd them back, but their curiosity was stronger than his commands. Ellie's heart hammered so hard she was sure the horses could hear it. but she kept her breathing steady, kept her hands light on the reins, kept moving toward the canyon entrance like she had all the time in the world. The wild horses followed, into the canyon, past the first stationed rider who sat motionless as stone, past the second, deeper into the narrowing walls. The stallion came last, suspicious and aggressive, but unwilling to abandon his herd. His eyes rolled white with distrust, but he came. When the last horse cleared the final checkpoint, the cowboys moved with practiced precision, ropes across the canyon mouth, riders blocking escape routes. In 15 minutes of controlled chaos, they had 73 wild mustangs trapped in a natural corral. The horses milled and screamed and tested the barriers, but the walls held. The ropes held. The men held. They'd done it. That night they made camp at the canyon mouth, taking turns on watch to ensure the captured mustangs didn't find a way out. The fire burned low and warm, the first real heat they'd felt in days. Jack found Ellie sitting apart from the others, staring at the stars. He lowered himself beside her, groaning slightly as his abused muscles protested. "That was smart thinking today," he said. "The way you read the herd, Rose would have been impressed." "Would she? She was always the smart one in our partnership, saw things I missed, thought around corners." He was quiet for a moment. "I think you two would have been friends." Ellie turned to look at him. The firelight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched there, but also something softer, something like hope. "Tell me about her. Really tell me. Not just that she was smart or brave. Tell me who she was." So he did. He talked about Rose's terrible singing voice and how she sang anyway because she didn't care what anyone thought. About how she could gentle the meanest horse but couldn't cook to save her life. About how she'd wanted to travel the world but settled for traveling the trail with him, turning it into an adventure instead of a sacrifice. "She made everything better just by being in it," he finished quietly, "like you do. Jack? No, let me say this. When Rose died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just go through the motions until Ruby was grown, then maybe I'd let myself feel something again. But you," he reached for her hand, rough palm against rough palm. "You made me want to live again. Not just survive, actually live." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "When this is over, when we sell these horses and save the ranch, we'll get married, build that life, give Ruby the family she's been praying for." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "That's a promise." The moment held perfect and fragile. Then one of the cowboys called out, breaking the spell, "Boss Rider coming fast." They were on their feet instantly, hands moving to weapons out of pure instinct. But the rider who burst into the firelight was familiar. Young Tommy from town, barely 16, his horse lathered and blowing. "Mr. Stone?" The boy gasped for air. "Mrs. Chen sent me. It's Ruby. She's missing." The words hit like physical blows. Jack went white, then red, then white again. "What do you mean, missing?" Tommy pulled a telegram from his jacket with shaking hands. "There was a blizzard yesterday. Big one. Ruby was with Mrs. Chen at the saloon, but then Mrs. Stone showed up, that mean lady from Boston, and there was shouting, and Ruby ran out into the storm. Nobody's seen her since. Mrs. Chen's got the whole town searching, but with the snow." Jack was already moving, catching his horse, throwing on the saddle with jerky, desperate movements. "Jack, wait!" Ellie grabbed his arm. "Think! The horses. If we leave them here without enough men, they'll break out. All this work for nothing." "I don't give a damn about the horses," his voice cracked. "My daughter is out there. Alone. In a blizzard. She could be frozen. She could be hurt. She could be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I know. Ellie's mind raced. "Take Tommy and 2 men. Ride hard for Dust Creek. Old Iron and I will bring the horses down with the others. We can do it. You know we can." "Ellie, that's a week's drive through mountain passes with wild horses that aren't even halter broke. If a storm hits, if they stampede—" "Then we'll handle it. But Ruby needs you now, not in a week. Now." She gripped his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Go find your daughter. I'll bring your future home. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then he kissed her hard and desperate and terrified. "You come back to me," he said. "You and every one of these men. You hear me? I hear you, now go." She watched him ride into the darkness, taking Tommy and 2 cowboys with him. Watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded into nothing. Then she turned to Old Iron and the 2 remaining cowboys. "All right, here's what we're going to do." The next 7 days were the hardest of Ellie's life. Harder than losing her parents. Harder than being rejected by her fiancé. Harder than leaving everything she knew for a future with a stranger. They moved the herd through mountain passes where one false step meant a 1,000-foot drop. Through valleys where the wind cut like knives and the cold was a living thing that wanted them dead. Through stands of pine where the snow sat heavy on branches ready to cascade down and spook horses into fatal panic. The mustangs fought them every step. The stallion tried to lead breakouts 3 times. The stallion tried to lead breakouts 3 times, but the barriers held. Every horse stayed trapped, though one mare injured her leg testing the ropes. Old Iron treated it, and she recovered enough to travel. But Ellie learned to think like the horses to anticipate their moves, learned to push when they needed pushing and give space when they needed space, learned that leadership wasn't about dominance, but about being the steady thing in an unstable world. The men watched her with growing respect, stopped questioning her decisions, started looking to her for direction when Old Iron was busy elsewhere. On the 4th day a storm rolled in. Not as bad as the blizzard that had taken Ruby, but bad enough. Snow fell thick and fast, reducing visibility to arm's length. The mustangs milled dangerously, panic rising. "We need to shelter," one cowboy shouted over the wind. "Find cover till it passes." But Ellie was looking at the terrain, at the way the land sloped, at what she could barely see through the white curtain. "No, we push through. There's a valley half a mile ahead. If we stop here, the horses will scatter in the confusion. We keep them moving, keep them together." "Miss Ellie, we can't see 10 feet. "Then we trust the horses to see for us. They want lower ground same as we do. We guide them, don't fight them." It was the longest half-mile of her life. Every moment she expected to hear hooves going over a cliff, expected to lose men and horses to the white blindness. But they kept moving, kept together. And when the storm finally broke, they were in the valley she'd remembered from the maps Jack had shown her. All the men, all but the 5 horses already lost. They'd made it. Old Iron rode up beside her, his beard crusted with ice, his eyes bright with something like pride. "Ma'am, I've ridden with a lot of trail bosses in my time. You just proved yourself better than most of them. Jack's a lucky man. Jack's a terrified father who better have found his daughter alive." "He did." Old Iron's smile cracked the ice on his face. "Got word yesterday at the relay station. Found Ruby in a cave 3 miles outside town. Cold and scared, but alive. She'd saved a wolf pup from a trap and holed up with it till the storm passed. Both of them came through fine." Ellie's knees went weak. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will, not letting herself think about Ruby frozen in the snow, or Jack's grief if they lost her. Now the relief hit like a wave. Thank God. Oh, thank God. Amen to that. Now let's get these horses to Cheyenne and collect our payday. Your wedding needs funding after all. They reached Dust Creek on the 7th day. The town turned out to watch them drive 68 wild mustangs down the main street. Sarah Chen stood outside the Lucky Star grinning. The children from Ellie's school cheered and waved. And there in front of the ranch house stood Jack and Ruby. The girl looked thin and pale, but undeniably alive. She wore 3 blankets and a huge smile. Jack had his arm around her shoulders, holding her like he'd never let go again. Ellie dismounted on legs that barely held her weight. She'd been in the saddle for 7 days straight. Her body was one giant bruise. Her hands were raw. Her face was wind-burned beyond recognition. She didn't care. Ruby broke free from her father and ran colliding with Ellie hard enough to knock her back a step. Small arms wrapped around her waist, face buried in her coat. "You came back. Papa said you would, but I was scared you wouldn't." "I promised, didn't I? I keep my promises." Jack approached more slowly, his eyes cataloging every bruise, every sign of hardship. When he reached them, he pulled both of them into his arms. 73 head, Old Iron announced to the gathering crowd, brought down through Devil's Pass in a snowstorm, led by this woman here who's got more sand than any 10 men I know. The townspeople burst into applause, children whistled. Even the horses seemed to celebrate nickering and stamping, but Ellie only had eyes for Jack, for the way he was looking at her, like she'd hung the moon, like she was everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. "I was so scared," he said quietly. "Scared I'd lost Ruby. Scared I'd asked too much of you. Scared I'd never get the chance to tell you. Tell me what? That I love you. Have for weeks now. Maybe from the moment you ran toward that stampede instead of away from it." He cupped her face in his hands. "Elena Hartford, you're the bravest, most stubborn, most perfect woman I've ever met. And if you'll still have me, I'd like to marry you as soon as humanly possible." "That's the best offer I've had all week. Only this week. Well, Old Iron did offer to teach me how to play poker. Marry me before Old Iron teaches you anything else." She kissed him there in front of God and the entire town, and the crowd cheered loud enough to spook the Mustangs into a fresh bout of nervous dancing. Ruby tugged on both their sleeves. "Can we have the wedding now? I'm tired of waiting." "Christmas Eve," Jack said, not taking his eyes off Ellie. "Just like we planned. That's still 3 weeks away. Then you better start practicing your flower girl walk." Later, after the Mustangs had been corralled and the men paid their shares and Ruby had been fed and put to bed with strict instructions not to rescue any more wolf pups, Jack and Ellie stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. "We need to get those horses to Cheyenne," Ellie said. "Sell them before Vivian's deadline." "Already arranged. Army buyers coming here day after tomorrow. Old Iron negotiated while you were gone. $1.60 a head for the broke ones, $1.20 for the rest." Jack did the math in his head. "That's near $1,000, more than enough to clear the debt with money left over. Then we won." "You won. I'd have lost everything if you hadn't brought those horses home." "We won," she corrected firmly. "Together. That's how partnerships work." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. 3 more weeks until you're legally stuck with me and my contrary daughter. Can't wait." And standing there under the Wyoming stars with the ranch secure and Ruby safe and a future stretching bright before them, Ellie knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for. Not safety, not security, not the careful, planned life she'd imagined with Thomas Garrett, but something better, something real, home. The army buyer arrived exactly when promised, a grizzled major with sharp eyes and a reputation for fair dealing. He walked among the corralled Mustangs, examining teeth and legs and conformation with the practiced eye of someone who'd bought 10,000 horses in his career. 68 head, he confirmed, making notes in a leather journal. 14 already halter broke, the rest green, but healthy. He looked up at Jack. "I'll give you $1.60 for the broke ones, $1.25 for the others. That's $1,090 total." The number hung in the air like a benediction. $1,110, more than enough to clear the $800 debt with $300 left over. Enough to save the ranch, enough to secure their future. Jack shook the major's hand, his grip firm, despite the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Deal." The transaction took less than an hour. Papers signed, money counted out in crisp bills that felt like victory in Jack's calloused hands. The major arranged for his men to collect the horses the following day, then tipped his hat to Ellie with genuine respect. "Ma'am, I heard you brought these Mustangs down through Devil's Pass in a blizzard. That's either brave or crazy." "Both, probably. The Army could use more crazy. We'll be back next year if you're interested in another hunt." After he'd gone, Jack stood in the middle of the ranch yard, holding $1,100 like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Ruby danced around him, whooping with joy. Old Iron and the remaining cowboys grinned like fools. "We did it," Jack said quietly. "We actually did it." Ellie moved to his side, bone-tired and wind-scarred, and happier than she'd been in years. "We did it. That evening, Sarah Chen organized an impromptu celebration at the Lucky Star. The whole town turned out. Ranchers and shopkeepers, cowboys and their families' children running wild between tables while their parents raised glasses to impossible victories and stubborn determination. Ruby held court in the corner, regaling her schoolmates with increasingly dramatic versions of her rescue. The wolf pup, now named Shadow, and living in the barn against Jack's better judgment, featured prominently in every telling. "And then the blizzard got so bad I couldn't see my own hands," Ruby said with theatrical flair. "But Shadow kept me warm. We huddled together in that cave for 2 whole days." "It was 1 day," Jack called from across the room. 2 days in cave time. Everything's longer when you're scared and cold." Laughter rippled through the saloon. These were good people, Ellie thought. People who worked hard and loved fiercely and showed up when it mattered. People who'd become her community without her quite noticing when it happened. Sarah appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Drink, you earned it." "I don't usually." "Tonight you do." Sarah clinked glasses with her. "To the woman who saved Jack Stone from his own stubbornness." "I think he saved himself." "No, you saved each other." "That's how the best partnerships work." Sarah's expression turned serious. "But you know this isn't over, right? Women like Vivian Blackwood don't accept defeat. She'll come back with something else, something worse." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of unease through Ellie's celebration-warm happiness. Let her come. We'll be ready. But she wasn't ready. None of them were. Vivian arrived 3 days later, the morning Jack had planned to ride into Cheyenne to pay off the bank debt. She brought a lawyer, a stack of papers, and a smile that promised ruin. Beatrice Stone came with her, looking grimmer than ever in her perpetual black like a carrion bird waiting for something to die. "Jack Stone," Vivian's voice carried across the yard. "How fortuitous. I was hoping to catch you before you made a very embarrassing mistake." Jack descended from the porch, the $1,100 secured in his saddlebag, his face carefully neutral. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Stone, unexpected pleasure. Is it because I suspect what I'm about to tell you won't feel very pleasant?" Vivian gestured to her lawyer, a pinched man named Whitmore, who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. "Show him." Whitmore produced documents with bureaucratic flourish. "Mr. Stone, it's come to our attention that this ranch sits on land that was illegally homesteaded. The original claim filed in 1870 by your father was fraudulent. The land rightfully belongs to the Kendrick estate." The words didn't make sense at first. Ellie watched confusion cross Jack's face, followed by disbelief, then dawning horror. "That's impossible. My father bought this land legal, had the deed, the bill of sale, everything." "Did he?" Vivian's smile widened. "Because I've purchased the true deed from Howard Kendrick's heir, the original homesteader whose claim your father somehow managed to steal through falsified documents." She held up a yellowed paper, official-looking and old. "This gives me legal ownership of every acre you're standing on." Jack took the document, studied it with hands that trembled slightly. Ellie moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. The deed looked authentic. Aged paper, official seals, signatures that appeared genuine. "This can't be right," Jack said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's perfectly right. Verified by a territorial judge just yesterday." Vivian's tone dripped false sympathy. "I'm afraid you have 30 days to vacate the property. You can keep your personal possessions, of course, but the land, the buildings, everything else, mine." "You can't do this." Ellie heard the desperation in her own voice. "This is his home, Ruby's home. It was never legally theirs. They've been squatting on stolen land for 15 years. Beatrice spoke for the first time, her voice cold with righteous certainty. "Perhaps this is Providence. Now Jack can finally accept reasonable employment, and Ruby can come to Boston where she belongs." Ruby had emerged from the barn, Shadow at her heels. She looked between the adults, reading the devastation on her father's face. "Papa, what's happening?" "Nothing, baby. Just go inside for a bit." "But—" "Now, Ruby." The child fled, the wolf pup scrambling after her. Ellie heard the door slam. heard Ruby's muffled crying through the walls. Jack's jaw worked, fury and helplessness warring across his features. "I don't believe you. This deed, it's got to be fake. My father wouldn't—" "Your father was a desperate man who saw an opportunity and took it." Whitmore consulted his papers. Howard Kendrick filed his claim in 1869, but abandoned it 6 months later when his wife fell ill. Your father filed in 1870, knowing full well the land wasn't available. He falsified documents saying Kendrick had relinquished all rights. "Where's your proof?" "In the Territorial Archives in Denver, all very official, all very damning." Vivian stepped closer. "But I'm not unreasonable, Jack. I'll give you a choice. Sign over any claim to this property, work for me as trail boss, and I'll pay you well enough to rent a small place in town. Ruby can visit during your off months. Or fight me in court, lose everything, including your dignity, and end up with nothing." The silence stretched like wire, pulled too tight. Then Ellie spoke. "We'll fight." Everyone turned to look at her. "We'll fight," she repeated, stronger now, "because I don't believe that deed is legal. And even if Jack's father made a mistake 15 years ago, Jack didn't. He's built a life here, raised a daughter here, earned this land with blood and sweat. We're not giving it up without proof." Vivian's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool, both of you." "Maybe. But we're stubborn fools with nothing left to lose." After they'd gone, promising to return in 30 days with a court order, Jack stood in the yard like a man struck by lightning. Ellie wrapped her arms around him from behind, holding tight. "We'll find a way," she whispered. "I promise you, we'll find a way." But she had no idea how. The answer came from Old Iron, who'd been thinking while everyone else was panicking. "Denver," he said that evening. The three of them gathered around the kitchen table while Ruby slept upstairs. "The Territorial Land Office in Denver. If your father falsified documents, there'd be records. But if he didn't, if Kendrick really did relinquish his claim, then we can prove Vivian's deed is the fake one," Ellie finished. "How long to get to Denver?" 2 days hard riding, 3 if you want to arrive conscious." "I'll go." Ellie stood, decision made. "Jack needs to stay here with Ruby, and if Vivian's watching, she'll expect you to be the one searching for evidence." "She'll have people watching the land office," Jack warned. "If she sees you digging through records, then I'll be careful, discreet." Ellie began mentally cataloging what she'd need. "Old Iron, you'll come with me as protection, and because you knew Jack's father. You might recognize things I'd miss." "Be honored to ma'am." They left before dawn, taking the fastest horses and enough supplies for a week. The ride to Denver was hard, and cold November settling into the high country with serious intent. But Ellie barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was already racing ahead, planning, strategizing. The Territorial Land Office occupied a squat brick building that smelled of mildew and old paper. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers and patient eyes, looked up when they entered. "Help you folks. We need to research a land claim from 1870, Dust Creek area, filed by—" Ellie paused, realizing she didn't know Jack's father's name. Robert Stone, Old Iron supplied, and possibly a conflicting claim by Howard Kendrick, filed 1869. The clerk consulted a massive ledger. "That'll be in Archive Room 3. You're welcome to search, but I should warn you the 1860s and 70s records are in rough shape. Water damage from a roof leak 5 years back. Some documents are barely readable." Barely readable was an understatement. Ellie spent 3 days wading through boxes of deteriorating paperwork, squinting at faded ink, trying to piece together the truth from fragments and smudges. On the second day, she found it. A bill of sale dated March 1870 showing Robert Stone purchasing property rights from Howard Kendrick, legal and official. But the paper had suffered water damage. Half the signatures were illegible. The legal description of the land was smeared beyond recognition. "This proves Jack's father bought it legal," Old Iron said, "but it's too damaged to hold up in court. There has to be a backup." The clerk said something about copies being sent to Washington for the official territorial records. The clerk, when asked, looked apologetic. "Yes, ma'am, but those records take months to retrieve. You'd need to file a formal request, and even then, we don't have months, we have 3 weeks." Ellie stood outside the land office, frustration and despair, fighting for dominance. They'd found evidence, but not enough. Not proof that would stand up against Vivian's apparently legitimate deed. "Miss Ellie," a voice from behind her, familiar but unexpected. She turned to find Thomas Garrett standing there, hat in hand, looking uncertain, the man she'd been meant to marry, the stranger who'd become a friend through letters and one brief meeting. "Thomas, what are you doing in Denver?" "Cattle business. But I heard you were in town asking questions at the land office." He smiled sheepishly. "Small territory, word travels. Is it true you're in trouble? Something about a fraudulent land claim." She found herself explaining the whole situation, words tumbling out faster than she could organize them. Thomas listened with the quiet attention she remembered from their single meeting in Cheyenne. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father-in-law might be able to help." "Your father-in-law?" "Federal Judge William Harrison. He's got connections in Washington, can expedite record requests that would normally take months. If you need those backup documents fast, he's your best chance." Hope flared bright and painful in Ellie's chest. "Would he help us? We're strangers to him, but you're not strangers to me, and I owe you." "You don't owe me anything." "I do. You set me free to find my own happiness. Let me help you protect yours." Judge Harrison turned out to be a dignified man in his 60s with keen eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened to Ellie's story in his Denver office, asked pointed questions, examined the water-damaged bill of sale with careful attention. "This is legitimate," he said finally, "or was before the water damage. But proving it in court against an apparently valid competing claim," he shook his head, "you need those Washington records. And you need them in 2 weeks, not 2 months. Can you help?" He pulled out official stationery, began writing with decisive strokes. "I can telegraph my colleague in Washington, mark it urgent, have him search the Federal Archives personally instead of going through normal channels. It's irregular, but given the circumstances," he signed with a flourish, "you'll have your answer in 10 days, maybe less if luck runs your way." "Thank you." Ellie's voice cracked. "Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. If those records support the other claim, this won't help you at all." But it was a chance. The first real chance they'd had since Vivian played her new hand. Ellie and Old Iron made it back to Dust Creek in 2 days, driven by urgency and hope in equal measure. Jack met them in the yard, Ruby clinging to his hand, both of them looking like they hadn't slept since Ellie left. "Did you find anything?" "Maybe. Judge Harrison's expediting a search in Washington. We'll know in 10 days. The wait was agony. Every morning Ruby ran to meet the mail coach, hoping for a telegram. Every evening they gathered around the table, trying to plan for a future that might not exist. On the 8th day, Sarah Chen organized a town hall meeting at the church. 40 people showed up, ranchers and merchants, families and single cowboys, everyone who'd come to know Jack Stone as a fair man and good neighbor. "We heard about the trouble with Vivian Blackwood," Tom Bradley said, speaking for the assembled crowd. "Heard she's trying to take your land based on some old claim." "That's about the size of it," Jack admitted. "Well, we don't like it. Don't like outsiders coming in here trying to push around one of our own." Sarah stood, her small frame radiating determination. "Jack Stone's got more integrity in his little finger than Vivian Blackwood's got in her whole body. She's got money, but we've got something better. We've got each other." One by one, people stood, offering support, offering testimony, offering to stand witness in court if needed. The school families spoke about Ellie's teaching. The ranchers spoke about Jack's fair dealings. The storekeepers spoke about debts paid on time and promises kept. By the time the meeting ended, Ellie had tears streaming down her face. This was community. This was family, broader and deeper than blood. Ruby stood on a chair, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Thank you, all of you. Papa's the best man I know, and Miss Ellie's the best woman. They deserve to be happy. They deserve to keep their home. Our home, someone called from the back. This ranch belongs to all of us in a way. It's where we buy horses, where our kids learn reading, where we know we can get help if times get hard. Losing it would hurt the whole territory. The telegram arrived on the 10th day. Ellie was teaching when Ruby burst into the schoolroom waving the yellow paper like a battle flag. It came. The telegram from Washington came. Ellie's hands shook as she opened it. The students watched with wide eyes, sensing the importance of the moment. The words swam before her eyes at first, then snapped into focus. Federal Archives confirmed bill of sale, March 1870. Stop. Robert Stone, legal purchaser from Howard Kendrick. Stop. Kendrick signed full relinquishment. Stop. Copies being sent via express mail. Stop Harrison. She read it twice to be sure. Then she looked up at Ruby's anxious face and smiled so wide it hurt. We have proof, legal federal proof. The ranch is ours. Ruby's shriek of joy probably shattered windows in Cheyenne. The students erupted in celebration. Ellie grabbed the nearest child and danced, all dignity forgotten. They had 10 days until Vivian's deadline. 10 days to prepare for the court hearing where they'd present their evidence and fight for everything that mattered. 10 days until justice would be served or denied. But tonight, in the small ranch house with Jack and Ruby and the community that had claimed them, Ellie allowed herself to hope. They'd fought stampedes and blizzards and mountains. They'd survived separation and fear and the constant threat of loss. Surely they could survive one more battle. Surely love and truth were stronger than money and lies. She had to believe that. They all did. The alternative was unthinkable. The Dust Creek Courthouse was barely worthy of the name. A single room with wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, and windows that rattled in their frames when the wind blew hard. But on this gray December morning, it held the entire territory's attention. Every bench was packed. Townspeople stood along the walls when the seats filled. Children sat on the floor near their parents' feet. This wasn't just about Jack Stone's ranch anymore. It had become about whether money and manipulation could triumph over honest work and community bonds. Judge William Harrison presided, having traveled from Denver at his own expense. He sat behind the makeshift bench with the bearing of a man who'd overseen 1,000 cases and intended to see this one done right. Vivian Blackwood occupied the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, Whitmore, both dressed in expensive dark clothes that made everyone else in the room look shabby by comparison. Beatrice Stone sat beside them, her face carved from disapproval and certainty. Jack and Ellie sat at the defense table with Old Iron behind them for moral support. Ruby perched between her father and Ellie, wearing the calico dress and cowboy boots that had become her signature compromise. Marshal Thomas Hayes stood near the door, his presence a reminder that this was official business, that consequences would follow whatever judgment came down. Judge Harrison brought down his gavel. The sharp crack silenced the murmuring crowd. This court is now in session. We're here to determine the rightful ownership of the property known as Dust Creek Ranch, currently occupied by Jackson Stone. Mrs. Blackwood, your claim. Whitmore stood, his thin voice filling the room with practiced legal precision. Your Honor, we present irrefutable evidence that the land in question was illegally obtained. The original homestead claim filed in 1869 by Howard Kendrick was never properly relinquished. Mr. Stone's father, Robert Stone, filed a fraudulent claim in 1870, falsifying documents to suggest abandonment. He produced Vivian's aged deed with theatrical flourish. This document, authenticated by a territorial surveyor, proves Mrs. Blackwood's legal purchase of the Kendrick claim from the rightful heir. The Stone family has been for 15 years unlawfully occupying land that belongs to my client. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Harrison examined the deed with careful attention, his expression revealing nothing. Mr. Stone, do you have documentation proving your father's legal purchase? Jack stood, his rough hands clenching and unclenching. We found a bill of sale in the Denver Land Office, Your Honor, dated March 1870. Shows my father bought the land legal from Kendrick, but water damage made it hard to read. Hard to read or convenient to claim. Whitmore's tone dripped condescension. Your Honor, we have witnesses who will testify to Robert Stone's questionable character and his history of cutting corners. Over the next hour, Whitmore paraded 3 men through the witness stand. All claimed to have known Robert Stone. All suggested he was the type to bend rules when it suited him. None could provide actual evidence of wrongdoing, but their testimonies painted a picture of a desperate man willing to do whatever it took to secure land. Ellie watched Jack's face grow harder with each insinuation, each attack on his father's memory. She reached under the table, found his hand squeezed hard. Then Beatrice took the stand. "Mrs. Stone," Whitmore began, "you're the sister of Jack Stone's late wife, correct?" "I am." "And you have concerns about your niece Ruby's well-being in her current situation." "I do." Beatrice's voice was firm, righteous. "Ruby deserves stability, a proper home, education in a civilized place, not this wilderness. Her father may love her, but love isn't enough. She needs structure, refinement, opportunities that a struggling ranch can never provide. And if Mr. Stone loses this property, then perhaps he'll finally accept that Ruby belongs with family who can actually care for her. In Boston, where she can become a proper young lady instead of a half-wild child running around in boys' clothes." Ruby's small hand crept into Ellie's. The child's face had gone pale, but her jaw was set with Stone family stubbornness. "Your Honor," Whitmore continued, "this case isn't just about land ownership. It's about what's best for an innocent child. Mrs. Blackwood is prepared to offer Mr. Stone employment as a trail boss, providing income while his daughter receives proper care in Boston. It's more than generous given the circumstances." Judge Harrison's gaze swept the courtroom, landing on Jack. "Mr. Stone, do you have legal representation?" "No, sir, just the truth and whatever proof we can muster." "That's hardly adequate for—" "Your Honor." Ellie stood, her voice clear despite the trembling in her legs. "May I speak on Mr. Stone's behalf?" Whitmore objected immediately. "This woman has no legal standing. She's not family, not counsel, not—" "She's my intended wife," Jack said. "Wedding set for Christmas Eve. That gives her standing enough in my book." Judge Harrison considered, then nodded. "I'll allow it. Miss Hartford, proceed." Ellie's teaching experience kicked in. She'd faced rooms full of skeptical parents and bored students. This was just another audience that needed convincing. "Your Honor, members of this community, I came to Wyoming Territory 4 months ago to marry a stranger, a man I'd never met, whose advertisement promised security and respectability. I got off at the wrong station." She paused. Let the words settle. "Best mistake I ever made." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Judge Harrison's expression remained neutral, but she thought she saw interest flicker in his eyes. "I met Jack Stone the day I arrived. Met his daughter, who'd been praying every night for someone to fill the hole her mother's death left behind. I watched this man work himself to exhaustion, trying to be both father and mother. Watched him teach his daughter to read by firelight after 14-hour days. Watched him choose her safety over his own pride again and again." She moved to stand beside the defense table, one hand on Ruby's shoulder. "Mrs. Stone says Ruby needs refinement. I say Ruby needs love. Mrs. Blackwood says she has legal claim to this land. I say 15 years of honest work and paid taxes create a claim that supersedes paper from a man who abandoned his homestead before Jack Stone's father ever filed." "Those are fine sentiments," Whitmore interrupted, "but sentiment doesn't supersede law. Neither does greed masquerading as justice." The crowd erupted in applause. Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. "Order, Miss Hartford, do you have actual evidence to present, or just passionate speeches?" "I have evidence, Your Honor, but it's being delivered via express mail from Washington. It should arrive." She glanced at the clock on the wall. The stage from Cheyenne was due at noon. It was 11:45. Any moment now. "Your Honor, this is absurd." Whitmore's voice rose. "They're stalling, hoping for a miracle that will never—" "Excuse me." A small voice clear as a bell cut through the courtroom tension. Every head turned. Ruby Stone stood on her chair, her small frame rigid with the same stubborn determination that defined her father. Her calico dress was pressed neat, but her cowboy boots were planted firm on the wooden seat. "Ruby, sit down," Jack whispered, urgently reaching for her. "No, Papa." She turned to face Judge Harrison directly, her 8-year-old voice unwavering. "Your Honor, may I say something, please?" Judge Harrison's stern expression wavered. "This is highly irregular, young lady." "I know, sir, but this is about me and my family. Don't I get to say what I want?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, briefly." Ruby took a visible breath, gathering courage. "My papa keeps promises. He promised my mama before she went to heaven that he'd take care of me. And he has, every single day." Her voice strengthened. "He reads to me even when he's so tired he falls asleep in the middle of sentences. He braids my hair even though he's terrible at it. He lets me wear boots with dresses because he knows I need both to be myself." She pointed directly at Vivian without hesitation. "That lady doesn't want to help us. She wants our land. She wants to make Papa work far away, so I have to live with Aunt Beatrice in Boston, where they'll try to make me into someone I'm not." Ruby's voice cracked, but didn't break. "I'm not broken. I'm not wild. I'm just me. And Papa loves me exactly how I am. Miss Ellie does too. We're a real family, and families fight for each other." She looked around the packed courtroom, meeting the eyes of neighbors and friends. "Please don't let that lady take our home just because she has money and fancy papers. We only have love and truth, but maybe that should count for something." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Whitmore looked uncomfortable. Several women in the gallery were openly crying. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his stern face considerably softer. "Thank you, Miss Stone. That was very brave. You may sit down now." Ruby sat and Jack immediately pulled her close, his jaw working as he fought emotion. Ellie reached across and squeezed the child's hand, her own eyes bright with tears. Whitmore opened his mouth, closed it again. What could he possibly say to rebut an 8-year-old child's plea? Judge Harrison was about to speak when the courthouse door banged open. Thomas Garrett stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, breathing hard like he'd been running. In his hands, a leather courier pouch stamped with federal seals. "Evidence from the Territorial Archives in Washington," he announced. "Delivered express at Judge Harrison's request." Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Judge Harrison, William, did you—" "I took the liberty of expediting a record search," Judge Harrison said calmly, "given the seriousness of the accusations and the tight time frame. The search was conducted by federal archivists with no stake in this case's outcome." Thomas approached the bench, handed over the pouch. Inside were official documents sealed and certified, the paper crisp and undamaged by time or water. Judge Harrison read in silence while the entire courtroom held its breath. Ellie counted her own heartbeats. 100, 200, she'd reached 300 when the judge finally looked up. According to federal records, Robert Stone purchased the property legally from Howard Kendrick on March 15, 1870. The bill of sale was properly executed, witnessed, and filed. Kendrick signed a full relinquishment of all claims, explicitly stating he was abandoning the homestead due to family illness. He turned cold eyes on Vivian. "Mrs. Blackwood, where exactly did you acquire your supposed deed?" Vivian's composure cracked slightly. "From Kendrick's heir, his nephew who inherited all property rights upon Kendrick's death in 1872. Interesting, because according to these records, Howard Kendrick died in 1884, and his will filed in Kansas left all property to his daughter, not a nephew." Judge Harrison held up another document. "This deed you've presented is fraudulent, recently manufactured to appear old, probably by the same forger who's been producing fake land claims across 3 territories." The courtroom exploded, voices raised in shock and vindication and anger. Marshal Hayes moved closer to Vivian's table, hand resting on his gun belt. Whitmore had gone white. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any fraud. My client assured me. Your client lied. Judge Harrison's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Blackwood, you've presented false documents in an attempt to steal property. That's a crime. Marshal Hayes, take her into custody. This is outrageous. Vivian was on her feet, all pretense of civility abandoned. I have money connections, lawyers who will find themselves in nearly as much trouble as you. Judge Harrison brought his gavel down with finality. Case dismissed. Jack Stone retains full ownership of Dust Creek Ranch. Mrs. Blackwood, you're fined $500 for court fraud and banned from purchasing land in Wyoming Territory. Any further legal action on this matter will result in criminal prosecution. Ruby's shriek of joy pierced the air. She launched herself at her father, who caught her and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. The townspeople erupted in celebration. Men clapped Jack on the back. Women hugged Ellie. Children ran wild between the benches, caught up in the adult joy they didn't fully understand. Through the chaos, Ellie saw Beatrice Stone sitting alone at the plaintiff's table, looking smaller somehow, diminished. Ellie made her way through the crowd, sat down beside the older woman. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Beatrice looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Why you won?" "Because you lost your sister, and you're losing your niece, and grief makes people do terrible things." Ellie paused. "I know. I've done my share. Rose would have hated me for this." Beatrice's voice cracked. "She always said I cared more about appearances than people. I told myself I was trying to honor her memory, give Ruby the opportunities Rose never had. But really," she wiped her eyes roughly, "really I was just angry that Rose chose this life over the one I thought she should want. Chose Jack over respectability, and when she died, I blamed him for not being able to save her. He blames himself too, maybe more than you ever could. I see that now." Beatrice looked toward Jack, who had Ruby on his shoulders while the town celebrated around them. "She's happy, I can see that. Rose would be proud of the child she's becoming. You could be part of that, if you wanted. Ruby needs family, aunts who send letters and birthday gifts and maybe visit sometimes." Beatrice managed a watery smile. "You'd let me after what I tried to do? Family's complicated, but it's still family." Later, after Vivian had been escorted out by the marshal, after the townspeople had finally dispersed with promises to return for the Christmas Eve wedding, after the paperwork had been signed and filed and made official, the Stone family stood together in the empty courthouse. Ruby was asleep on her father's shoulder, exhausted by emotion and victory. Jack looked at Ellie with eyes that held everything words couldn't capture. "We did it," he said simply. "We did it. 3 weeks until the wedding. 3 weeks until everything changes. Everything already changed the day you got off at the wrong station." She kissed him there in the silent courthouse, gentle and full of promise, careful not to wake the child between them. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and a sky so clear it hurt to look at. The church filled early, every pew packed with people who'd come to witness joy after so much struggle. Sarah Chen had worked miracles with decorations. Pine boughs wrapped every surface, their sharp scent mixing with wood smoke and candle wax. Ruby had created paper stars that hung from the rafters, each one slightly crooked and absolutely perfect. The children from Ellie's school served as unofficial ushers, guiding people to seats with exaggerated importance. The cowboys from Jack's trail crew stood along the walls in their best clothes hats, in hands weathered faces split with grins. Old Iron waited at the front, serving as Jack's best man despite his protests that he was too old and creaky for such nonsense. Jack stood beside him in a new shirt that Ellie had made his hair freshly cut, looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Ruby walked down the aisle first, scattering dried rose petals she'd saved from summer. She wore her calico dress, her cowboy boots, and a wreath of pine in her braided hair. Shadow the wolf pup tried to follow, but was gently redirected to Sarah's lap. Then Ellie appeared in the doorway. She'd made her dress from white wool, simple and elegant, warm enough for Wyoming winter. Emma's blue hair comb caught the candlelight, something borrowed and something blue combined. Sarah had lent her a lace shawl. The something new was the confidence in her spine, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She walked alone down the aisle, needing no one to give her away. She'd given herself, freely chosen to this life and this man and this ready-made family. Jack's eyes never left her face. When she reached him, he took her hands in his calloused ones, and she felt the slight tremor there. He was nervous. This hard, quiet man who'd faced stampedes and blizzards and threatened losses was nervous about making promises in front of witnesses. It made her love him more. Reverend Morrison, who'd married half the territory and buried the other half, kept the ceremony brief. These were practical people with little patience for flowery speeches. "Marriage is work," he said simply. "Hard work, same as ranching or any other worthwhile thing. You'll have good years and bad years, easy seasons and times when you wonder why you bothered. But if you're lucky, if you choose right, you get a partner who makes the work bearable, makes it meaningful, makes you better than you'd be alone." He looked at Jack and Ellie with knowing eyes. "I think you two chose right." When it came time for vows, Jack cleared his throat. "I'm not good with words. Ellie knows that, but I'll say this plain. You walked into my life when I'd stopped believing in second chances. You loved my daughter before you loved me. You fought for us when you could have walked away a dozen times. You're the bravest, most stubborn, most perfect woman I've ever known." His voice roughened. "I promise to be worthy of you, every day, for the rest of my life." Ellie had to blink back tears before she could speak. "I got off at the wrong station looking for safety and security. I found something better. I found home. I found purpose. I found a family that chose me back." She looked down at Ruby, who was watching with rapt attention. "I promise to love you both fiercely, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to make our house a home and our family a fortress, for better or worse, richer or poorer, as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jack, kiss your bride before she changes her mind." He did thorough and unhurried, and the congregation erupted in cheers and whistles. Ruby wedged herself between them, hugging them both. "We're a real family now, official and everything." "We were always a real family," Jack said. "This just makes it legal." The reception filled Sarah's saloon with music and dancing and food that would be talked about for years. Cookie had outdone himself with 3 kinds of pie. The ranchers contributed venison and beef. The townspeople brought vegetables and breads and preserves. Old Iron played guitar while couples danced. Ellie danced with Jack then, with Old Iron, then with Thomas Garrett, who'd stayed for the wedding with his wife. "Thank you," she told Thomas as they turned, "for everything, for helping with the evidence, for being gracious when I chose someone else. You helped me first, freed me to find real love instead of settling for arrangement." He glanced at his wife, who was chatting with Sarah. "I hope you're happy, Ellie. You deserve to be." "I am. More than I knew was possible." As evening deepened and the celebration showed no signs of stopping, Ellie stepped outside for air. The snow had started again, soft flakes that caught the light from the windows and turned the world into something from a fairy tale. Jack followed, wrapping his coat around both of them. "Too much celebrating. Too much happiness. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong. We won. Remember, the ranch is ours. Ruby's safe. We're married." He turned her to face him. "This is real, Ellie. This is the life we get to live." "I know. It's just—" She searched for words. "4 months ago, I was alone in Philadelphia, answering advertisements from strangers, hoping for something that felt like belonging. And now, I have everything I didn't know to ask for. 4 months ago, I was alone too. Going through motions, raising a daughter, holding on by my fingernails to a ranch, and a life that felt half-finished." He rested his forehead against hers. "Then you walked into my camp, looking for a lost little girl, and everything changed. Wrong station, right fate. Best kind of mistake there is." They stood together in the falling snow, the sounds of celebration warm behind them, the future bright and uncertain ahead. 2 years later, on another Christmas Eve, Elena Stone stood in the doorway of what was now called the Morrison Stone School, watching her students perform a nativity play for their parents. 15 children, now ranging from 5 to 14, their faces bright with concentration as they recited lines Ellie had helped them memorize. Ruby, now 10 years old and terrifyingly competent, served as assistant teacher. She'd kept her cowboy boots but added enough refinement to satisfy even Beatrice, who visited twice a year from Boston and sent letters monthly. The ranch had prospered. 10 permanent cowboys now worked the expanded herd. Jack's reputation as a fair boss and honest dealer had brought steady business. The Mustang hunts had become an annual event, providing supplemental income and adventure in equal measure. Ellie's hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with their second child. A boy, if the way he kicked was any indication. Ruby had campaigned hard for naming him Thunderstone, but had been persuaded to consider more traditional options. After the play, after the families had collected their proud young actors, after the schoolroom had been cleaned and locked for the holiday, Ellie walked home through the snow. The ranch house glowed with lamplight. Jack had spent the day cooking a meal that would probably be edible if they were lucky. Shadow, now a full-grown wolf, dozed on the porch despite the cold. Inside, warmth and the scent of pine and something burning slightly. Jack looked up from the stove with guilty relief when she entered. "Is it supposed to smoke like that?" "Probably not, but it's Christmas Eve. Even burned food tastes good on Christmas Eve." Ruby appeared from her room carrying a wrapped package. "Mama Ellie, this came for you, from the Territorial Governor's office." Ellie opened it with curious fingers. Inside was an official letter and a bank draft. "The Morrison Stone School has been approved for territorial funding," she read aloud. $500 annually to support education in rural areas, in recognition of exemplary service to the Wyoming Territory's youth. Jack let out a whoop, picked her up, despite her pregnant belly, spun her carefully. "That's amazing. That's everything." Ellie laughed, dizzy with joy. "We can get real books now, proper supplies, maybe even build a larger schoolhouse." Ruby hugged them both. "We did it. Everything Mama Rose wanted for us. A real home, a real family, a real future." Later, after Ruby had been tucked in bed with Shadow at her feet, after the dishes had been washed and the lamps dimmed, Jack and Ellie sat together by the fire. "You got off at the wrong station," Jack said softly. "And found my way home," Ellie finished. Outside, snow continued to fall on Dust Creek Ranch, on the schoolhouse that would shape the next generation, on the corrals full of good horses and the barn full of hope, on the town that had become family and the land that had become legacy. Inside by the fire, 3 people who'd found each other through chance and choice and stubborn determination celebrated the kind of Christmas that comes from building something real. Not perfect, never perfect, but theirs, earned and fought for, and absolutely worth every hard mile of the journey. Elena Hartford Stone closed her eyes and sent up a prayer of gratitude for wrong stations and right choices, for daughters who prayed and fathers who loved fiercely, for communities that stood together and justice that prevailed, for second chances and new beginnings, for home, the end.